Hello, I'm Rick Chisa, PSC's Government Relations Director. Thank you for your interest in the programs, policies, and political activities of your union. I often get asked the question, why does PSC focus so much on Olympia? It's a great question. Here are a few answers to that question. First, PSC has a proud legislative advocacy program that goes back decades. State lawmakers also decide what resources are needed to fund schools and the variety of services provided by ESPs. Most PSC members are public employees. Both K-12 and university ESPs are paid for by tax dollars. And lawmakers in Olympia make many critical decisions affecting the pay, benefits, retirement, and funding for school and university programs. PSC members have a direct vested interest in all of those decisions. Finally, because we represent more ESPs than any other labor organization in Washington, PSC takes our leadership role seriously. We lead the way with other education labor partners to improve the roles and livelihoods of ESPs and to better serve over 1 million public school students. Here's another look at why state-level budget advocacy is so important to our members. The biennial state budget that started on July 1st, K-12 and higher education account for over $33 billion out of $59.2 billion budget. It's about 56% of the entire state budget goes directly toward education. This year, lawmakers met for a 105-day virtual legislative session between January 11th and April 25th. Despite doing all of their business via Zoom, lawmakers actually approved an impressive list of pro-education and pro-worker legislation. Here's a short list of some of those highlights. Lawmakers invested $4 billion in new money for public education. $3 billion of that money is federal funds from the American Rescue Plan. Many PSC chapters are currently negotiating temporary premium pay as well as additional classified work hours as a result of those investments. Education employees gain new important workplace labor protections. Displaced education workers receive new benefits and protections in the unemployment system. And lawmakers made the first of several substantial steps that are needed to balance our state's tax code. Let's take a look at some notable policy changes that PSC advocated for this year in Olympia. First, PSC worked closely with Senator Karen Kaiser, chair of the Senate Healthcare Committee, to provide key protections for frontline education employees during a public health emergency. Senate Bill 5115 creates occupational disease presumption for frontline employees for the purposes of workers' compensation. It defines education employees as frontline workers when they are required to be physically present where classes are being taught in person, whether they're in a transportation vehicle necessary for school operations, or in a student home as part of their job duties. And also if the employee has in-person interaction of any kind with students' family members, or other employees as part of their job duties. The bill also requires employers to provide written notice to employees on the premises and their union of potential exposure to the infectious or contagious disease during a public health emergency. The legislation prohibits discrimination against an employee who is high risk for seeking accommodation that protects them from the disease or using all available leave options if no accommodation is reasonable. Senator Kaiser took time to hear PSC's concerns and adopted many of our recommendations into the final bill. She also stood strong and maintained these critical provisions of the legislation despite strong pressure to weaken the bill. Another major bill PSC worked on this year was House Bill 1214 that establishes new training requirements for classified school security and safety personnel. This measure builds on legislation first passed in 2019 that established training requirements for SROs, or school resource officers. House Bill 1214 requires safety and security staff to meet certain training requirements. Some of those training topics include civil rights of children in schools, youth mental health, trauma-informed practices with youth, bias-free policing, cultural competency, and de-escalation techniques. The legislation also directs school districts to adopt policies and procedures, adopt an agreement with a local law enforcement agency or security guard company supplying contracted school security staff, and also collect and submit certain information on safety and security staff to the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. School districts must also annually collect the information on safety and security staff regarding each incident where safety and security staff were involved that resulted in student discipline, use of force against a student, or a student arrest, and the number of complaints related to job duties and student interactions filed against safety and security staff. PSE is closely monitoring the implementation of these new training requirements. It's our position that current security employees should not have to complete the coursework as a condition of ongoing employment. Only newly hired employees ought to be subject to these training requirements. PSE applauds the leadership and hard work of Representative April Berg to achieve nearly unanimous support to reduce food insecurity for youth in our schools. In 2020, PSE enthusiastically supported Ms. Berg in her election campaign for the House of Representatives. She is a believer in great public schools, and she also has an established and impressive track record. Prior to her election to the House, Representative Berg served on both the Edmonds and Everett school boards. House Bill 1342, which she sponsored, eliminates school lunch copays for 77,000 eligible students in all grades. Plus, the state operating budget includes $8.9 million to offset the costs of 13.9 million meals for lower income students starting in the 21-22 school year. PSE also works with lawmakers from both political parties. We're a bipartisan union. We actually have a motto that states, labor, not labels. We have long established relationships with many Republican lawmakers, including Senator Mark Schessler, a wheat farmer from Ritzville. Senator Schessler sponsored Senate Bill 5202, which would require school districts to establish sub-funds to reserve money for future facility and equipment needs, including preventative maintenance and emergency facility needs. The bill is a response to many school districts that passed bonds for projects, but did not pay for all of the resulting preventative maintenance on those projects. PSE worked closely with Senator Schessler and other legislative leaders to fine-tune his proposal. We wanted to make sure school maintenance personnel would be able to perform the maintenance work subject to existing public works bid limits. The bill passed the Senate. However, it did not make it out of the House of Representatives, so it did not become law. There's some great strides in the area of paraeducator professional development. First, our paras across the state are making great progress through our first in the nation professional certification program. Nearly 20,000 paras completed the fundamental course of study by the end of June. PSE's efforts in 2021 led to stronger long-term footing in the state budget for funding paraeducator professional development. We secured $14.8 million over the next 2 years to pay for 14 hours of development time each year. And we secured an additional $32 million for the 2023 to 25 budget. That's a few years out, but it's important that we are now booking the funding for paraeducator development into future budgets. We won't have to fight every year to keep money in the budget now that the development money is booked in future budgets. Recently, PSE President Charlotte Schindler and I met with officials from OSPI to discuss certification fees. OSPI hasn't increased the processing fees since 2012. It appears certification fees for teachers and administrators are going to increase from $39 to $50. However, I'm happy to report at this moment, it appears as if fees for paraeducators will remain the same. This is a huge relief and a recognition of the cost burden on hourly employees. I'm also happy to tell you that Freeman PSE member Doug Pace recently joined Everett paraeducator Laura Rogers on the state paraeducator board. PSE has 2 members serving on the paraeducator board and they make the critical decisions around program development going forward and monitoring the progress of the paraeducator certification program. It's great to have two great minds representing our organization on the para board. In the area of apprenticeship, with the progress in professional development, interest in paraeducator apprenticeship is growing across the state. Recently, the State Apprenticeship and Training Council approved new Paraeducator 3 apprenticeship standards that provide a pathway to a teaching certificate through apprenticeship. Contact the PSC State Office for more information on apprenticeship programs and opportunities. Maybe you know that Washington is dead last when it comes to tax fairness. The lowest wage earners in our state actually pay the highest percentage of their income in state and local taxes, nearly 18%. Meanwhile, the wealthiest in our state pay the least, just 3%. The bar charts here show the total share of income going toward taxes for different segments of our population. The lowest wage earners are represented by the bar on the far left, with the highest earners represented on the far right. You can see with the Washington chart how the lowest wage earners pay the most, while the wealthy few pay the least. This is a situation that looks much different when we look to some of our neighboring states. You see Oregon and Idaho are relatively flat across the income spectrum, meaning roughly everyone pays about the same amount, at least within a few percentage points of their income toward taxes. California's tax code, on the other hand, is actually more progressive. It means that the highest income earners actually pay more in state and local taxes than everyone else. As I mentioned earlier, state lawmakers took two important steps to balancing our tax code earlier this year. First, the legislature adopted an excise tax on capital gains. This new tax would only affect about 60,000 wealthiest individuals in Washington and is expected to generate about $500 million in revenue per year. The sale of real estate and retirement accounts are exempted from the new excise tax, and proceeds from the capital gains tax will help fund public schools, improve access to higher education, and fund early learning programs. Second, the legislature approved a working families tax credit. This is modeled after the federal earned income tax credit for lower income individuals. It's estimated this tax credit would benefit roughly 420,000 taxpayers at the cost of about $18 million per year. With these two moves, Washington has begun the process to fix our upside down tax system and raise revenue to invest in our quality of life. Now that we've covered a few budget and policy issues, let's talk about the political component that matters most, and that is you, the members of PSE. Despite the massive disruptions from COVID-19, PSE has maintained great momentum throughout the pandemic. Hopefully, now is the time for members to return to in-person involvement in every aspect of PSE's political action programs and activities. For example, we had a tremendous turnout in January 2020 for our last in-person PSE event, our 2020 Legislative Conference in Olympia. Seems like almost an eternity ago. I hope you will consider attending our first in-person event in nearly 2 years. Our Legislative Council is now beginning plans for our in-person 2022 Legislative Conference, which will be held December 4th and 5th in SeaTac. In addition to our legislative conference, during the winter of 2022, we will be planning a handful of one-day lobby events in Olympia. Be sure to sign up early so you can help add momentum on our legislative priorities while legislators are doing their work. And as in previous years, we will also hold a Day on the Hill event for our higher education members from Central, Eastern, and Western Washington universities. In the past, we have met with higher education legislative leaders, labor partners, and also special guests. Dates for all of these events will be scheduled in the next few months. PSE also has a tremendous legislative internship program, one that is unique among all the labor groups in Olympia. PSE member interns get released from their jobs and they spend an entire week in Olympia learning about the legislative process and stepping up their legislative advocacy efforts. Our most recent intern class from 2020 was impressive. You can visit the legislative updates page on the member portal to read these member stories of their week in Olympia. Now a word about our Legislative Council. Behind everything we do in government relations is the PSC Legislative Council. Council members are a dedicated, hardworking group of leaders representing every community in our state. Council members are elected by zone at convention. They design and plan member events like legislative conference. They also review and recommend the annual legislative platform to the board of directors. And they're responsible for interviewing and recommending candidate and ballot measure endorsements and contribution amounts. Last summer, council members held dozens of Zoom meetings and interviews with legislative candidates all across the state. Today, the council's conducting in-person outreach with their local elected officials to say thank you on many of the PSC legislative accomplishments from earlier this year. In addition, council members will soon be holding interviews with candidates for a number of school board and locally elected positions. Look for our general election endorsements that are coming soon. I'm extremely proud to work beside these outstanding individuals who do so much to present a professional and positive view on behalf of all PSC members. PSC is working hard to make sure the voices of educators and working people are heard, whether during the legislative session, election cycles, or other times in between. Despite the achievements mentioned earlier, there's still so much work to be done, like more complete state funding for classified and ESP positions, more job security during economic downturns and public health emergencies, and gaining comparable health and retirement benefits for our K-12 private sector employees, and much, much more. Now, making education policy does not start in Olympia. It starts when we individually decide to get out of our seats and elect education champions who will stand up for Washington's schools and universities. So much is at stake right now. The vast majority of K-12 and higher ed funding dollars comes directly from Olympia. And the people who sit in those seats in Olympia have tremendous impact on how funding is distributed, not to mention all the policy decisions that impact your school district and university. Remember, you have the power to decide who will represent us in Olympia. Fortunately, there's some easy ways for you to get started. First, I'm asking you today to consider signing up for COPE. You can join thousands of PSC members who are making voluntary contributions each month to COPE. PSC COPE members currently are generating over $130,000 each year. For just a few dollars each month, we can elect the champions we need in Olympia and also have the resources to pay for our member activities in Olympia. Log into the member portal and choose to contribute. You can always update or withdraw your monthly contribution at any time. The next thing you can do is make sure you vote in the primary election on August 3rd. Ballots have already been sent out. All you have to do is fill out your ballot and return it. Have you seen the new PSC website? It looks absolutely terrific. To catch up on the latest legislative news, simply click on the member portal button at the top of the page, enter your username and password to enter the portal, then click on legislative updates. I post the latest news stories from Olympia as well as from Washington, D.C. And whatever your technology, you can also find all sorts of additional information on all of the measures I mentioned today by going to leg.wa.gov. Click on Bill Information. This site includes the text of the actual bills and laws, descriptions of what the bill would do, summaries of public testimony, links to TVW programming, and roll call vote records. You can also click on the House or Senate and look up more information on the lawmakers who represent you in Olympia. Once you check out all this useful information on these sites, now is the time to take action with PSC Phone to Action. PSC is making it easier than ever to take easy, quick, and effective actions with your elected officials. We're using the latest industry technology to advocate and communicate key messages with our legislators. PSC members can send emails, interact on social media, and make phone calls directly to your elected officials. That's all for now. Again, please visit the PSC member portal where you can read updates and see what is happening at the state and federal level that could affect you and your job. Again, I'm Rick Chisa. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you again soon.